If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
A salute and a thank you to you for your service. This is EJ Stewart. This is Tommy Beer. Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast. Audacy WFAN original. We got so much to get to on this show. I hope you guys enjoyed your Memorial Day weekend. We're back to talk more Knicks. Big news coming out of the New York Knicks camp. Scott Perry, the general manager for the Knicks since 2017, he is out as general manager. He is not going to be retained once his contract expires. That was first reported by Steve Popper of Newsday, then confirmed by other sources as well. So we'll talk about the Scott Perry legacy. We'll talk about where he goes from here and how history will look at him during his tenure as Knicks general manager. And then we got a lot of business going around the NBA. This is the biggest week in the NBA, really. You got the NBA Finals starting, so we got Nuggets and Heat finding a way to hold on in that Eastern Conference Championship Series against the Boston Celtics after losing an 0-3 lead. They go and they win Game 7. So now we got Nuggets and Heat. They play on Thursday. I want to ask Tommy, when you look at this series, what are some things you think the Knicks could take away from these two teams and their runs to the finals? And also, who does he have as a pick for this NBA Finals? And lastly, we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference because there's a big shakeup happening right now. We have two major coaching hirings. You got Milwaukee with Adrian Griffin. You got Philly with Nick Nurse. And then now that Boston did not make the finals, they were eliminated again in the Eastern Conference Finals. You also could be seeing a big shakeup there. So what does that all mean for the Knicks? I'll ask Tommy that as well. So plenty to get to on this episode. Again, my guy Tommy Beer is with me. Tommy, how you feeling? Hope the Memorial Day weekend was good for you.
Yes. Relaxing, chilling, spent some time with the fam, enjoyed it, got some nice weather this week. We're inching towards summer. Got the finals starting tomorrow. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. So lots of good stuff on the horizon. And as always, some Knicks news to talk about as well.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get right to it. So again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, the New York Knicks podcast. A podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. You can catch us on the Audacy Sports and WFAN channel. So make sure you subscribe, give us a comment, and give us a like on there as well. So let's begin with Scott Perry. So Newsday's Steve Popper is reporting that the Knicks general manager will not be retained when his contract expires this summer. Perry was hired by former team president Steve Mills in 2017 and stayed on in the GM capacity when Leon Rose took over in 2020. He was given a 2-year extension in 2021, but has seen his influence in the organization diminish with the arrivals of Executive Vice President Worldwide West William Wesley and Senior Basketball Advisor Gerson Rosas. So during Perry's tenure, the Knicks made the playoffs twice, including the advancing past the first round for the first time since 2013. They also signed the likes of Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, among others. They traded away Carmelo Anthony and Kristaps Porzingis, acquired Josh Hart via trade, and have drafted R.J. Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, and Quentin Grimes. So really, the foundation for this new era of Knicks basketball really is kind of wrapped around the Scott Perry era as general manager. So I'll ask you first, before we get into like where he ranks in history and kind of how you see the job he did, were you surprised to hear about this news that Perry will be out at the end of the summer?
I'm not. To be honest, I was surprised that he was retained by Rose and then signed an extension. Because as we know, once Rose came in, he was a highly respected executive, one of the top clients, agents in the agency world spectrum, certainly among in basketball circles, his clientele was top tier. So he comes, Dolan brings him in. He brings Worldwide West as part of his team with him. They bring in Walt Perrin as assistant GM. So I thought it made sense to keep Scott Perry around, keep some continuity, get a familiarity with the people, not only the players, but the staff and, dealing with Dolan, just kind of, in any job, you kind of, ideally, you'd prefer to have somebody that knows the ropes kind of show you around. And That's exactly what happened with Scott Perry. I thought, maybe they'd let him go, once his first contract would have expired, but they inked him to a 2-year extension. So it seems like they had a good working relationship. But, all things considered, I think it was only a matter of time before those two guys parted ways. And, Perry probably wanted a little more input, reading the tea leaves there. And then Leon Rose may have wanted somebody that, that's serving as GM that was handpicked. There's talk that it might be Rosas, who sounds like he was point on the discussions with Danny Ainge regarding Donovan Mitchell. So there's all that stuff to consider. So, long story short, I wasn't shocked when I heard the news. The timing seemed a little bit odd, but again, his contract was up this summer, so probably makes sense for both sides to move on.
Yeah, I'm not surprised as well, because as you noted, it was a little bit of a mini surprise when he was retained. I think one of the reasons why he was retained as general manager was when Leon Rose was hired. Remember, he was hired essentially in the middle of a season. You had why is forgetting his name? Steve Mills. I don't know why I couldn't blank his name for a second. Steve Mills was fired in the middle of a season. Dolan, and he didn't let the season play out. He actually hired Rose, towards the end of that season. And remember, the last game during that season was RJ Barrett, hitting the bucket against the Rockets, and Leon Rose was there. And then the pandemic happened, and that was the end of the Knicks season at that point. So I had Leon Rose probably been hired in the offseason, I would have thought that maybe he would have had a full offseason to say, okay, let me get my own general manager in here. But because of the way the dynamics of the season were, I think he decided to keep him on. So that was why I think he stayed. I'm a little surprised he's been here for this long. So that's, I guess, a credit to him and a credit to the fact that he was able to shift gears really quickly after working with Steve Mills for those years and ingratiate himself into the Leon Rose camp. And I'm not surprised. So at the end of the day, I look forward to where Perry goes. I think, to me, he stayed on longer because, in a way, this became like a resume booster. Like, to me, maybe he wasn't as influential as most GMs in other organizations. There are some teams that don't have presidents; they just have a general manager. Like, for example, the Golden State Warriors, which was the whole issue with Bob Myers. So sometimes general manager essentially is running basketball operations. Rob Pelinka was the general manager, then recently got promoted to president after the whole Magic Johnson ordeal. So for him, he could say, look, I was the general manager of a team that had no playoff success at all. And, now we went to, the second round of the playoffs. They're in a much better position than when I got them. So I think when he goes to his next job, he can say, hey, I could be a person that could be hired as a president of basketball operations or a vice president of basketball operations or a general manager role that will allow him to really kind of have all his tentacles on the team. I think that Scott Perry has shown that he deserves that opportunity, and I hope he gets it.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. Anyone that's been around him has had nothing but kind things to say about him. In covering the team, for all those many years going back, Perry was the one guy I had to sit down in the executive office with him and Mills up in Westchester. He just had again, every kind and generous with his time and all those things that lends oneself to be successful in any walk of life. Amazing story. His father's his relationship with the Steelers and the Rooney family. Truly remarkable path he kind of carved. And yeah, I agree with you. What he could go on TV and have some success. There's a ton of options out there for him. And like you said, it just, it made sense for, both of those guys, for Rose to kind of want more input and puts hand selected somebody, and then for Perry as well to just kind of, go out on his own. And as you said, there's, and I think you put it perfectly, the Knicks are in a better position today than they were when he was first hired. And there are a lot of organizations and every year there's lack of draft capital, and they just need somebody to kind of get the ship on the straight and narrow. And that's what Perry can certainly claim on his way out of New York.
Yeah, I mean, most fired general managers, and this wouldn't be a firing, but a lot of fired general managers are guys who aren't in work right now. A lot of them can't say that. A lot of them can't say the last job they were at that they left their job in a better position than when they got it. So the fact that Perry can now say that, he can go to other teams. I don't know. Washington apparently is looking for someone to run that organization. Maybe this is his way to get over there. And then he can say, hey, there's a job out there. They need a real basketball operation, not somebody who's kind of, under the tutelage or under the leadership of someone else. So I hope he gets that opportunity. I think he deserves it. to me, like, I think history will look at Scott Perry favorably for his Knicks tenure. But I think when you look at Knicks general managers, there's a long list of very incompetent people. And Perry will not be on that list, because I think when you talk about, again, the team that we have now, it has Perry's tentacles kind of all over. You know, he was involved with the drafting RJ Barrett. He signed Julius Randle in that what felt like at the time a disastrous offseason where you don't get Kevin Durant, you don't get Kyrie Irving. It felt like this was a front office that had failed miserably. And then, you know, they acquired a guy who, say what you want about him, the guy is a two-time All-NBA player, two-time All-Star, and has been a star player for a team that is now pointed up as opposed to pointed down, which is where Perry got them. Of course, again, he joined that Leon Rose front office and still found a way to make an imprint to the point where Rose would keep him around in the front office. And all the moves that happened since then, bringing in Emmanuel Quickly, bringing in Obi Toppin, bringing in Quinn Grimes, bringing in Josh Hart, all those things, Perry, he had some kind of say in, or at least he was a part of the team that was approving these moves. So, I mean, when I look at Scott Perry, he's got to be one of the better Knicks general managers they've had in a really long time. I was thinking about maybe Glenn Grunwald, but like even he brought in Bargnani, so I don't know how much credit I want to give him. But I think history will look favorably at Scott Perry when it's all said and done.
Yeah, no question. In terms of, yes, he's definitely one of the most successful GMs since kind of the Grunwald Checketts days. And now that's not saying much. It's a very low bar. You know?
The bar is the floor.
The bar is the floor. You know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, so to speak. You know? So that being said, and we kind of mentioned it, but it is important to just kind of reflect back on exactly where the Knicks were when Perry arrived in 2017. And that is a mess, a nightmare, a cluster, of a franchise. They just traded a first-round pick for Bargnani. Mills had signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to that ridiculous 4-year, $71 million contract. And don't forget Ron Baker to a 2-year, $9 million deal with a player option, inexplicably. I was looking at that, and I wrote about it this morning. I was looking at the 5 highest paid players on the roster that Perry inherited. So that's a 2017-2018 Knicks, 5 highest paid players. Enes Kanter making $20.5 million. Joakim Noah making $17.7 million. Tim Hardaway Jr. making $16.5 million. Courtney Lee making $11.7, and Lance Thomas making $6.6. Those are the 5 highest paid players on an NBA roster, and that's the roster that Scott Perry inherited.
That's why they were drafting number 3. That's why they got RJ Barrett that next season.
Right. So it was actually the Knox draft, and we'll get to that in a second. Right. That before the RJ Barrett one, but
that's true, right? Yeah.
But I think it's important to discuss kind of the delineation point when Rose arrived, because as you mentioned, a lot of these, the current Knicks team has has Perry's fingerprints on them, but it's kind of hard to give Perry credit for the signing of Brunson when we know that there was a lot of Rose involved, and the moves since Rose arrived, certainly can be taken. Whether you want to look favorably or unfavorably, it can't really be pinned squarely on Perry, or Perry can't, take full credit for it. But in the interim, again, the first order of business for Perry was that kind of cap clearing, house cleaning stuff. Traded away Carmelo Anthony's contract, got back a second, didn't have to take on any bloated contracts, got back a second-round pick, which they used to draft Mitchell Robinson with. And then the biggest trade the next year, end of January 2019, obviously the Kristaps Porzingis trade, very controversial at the time. Far less controversial today because of how well all the different aspects have played out for the Knicks. As you mentioned, the goal of the trade, they obviously traded in addition to KP, who had demanded a trade and was rehabbing an torn ACL. They traded KP along with Hardaway Jr., so got off that contract, got off Courtney's league contract, entered the summer of 2019 with around $70 million in cap space. Obviously, we're hoping to sign a Kevin Durant, a Kawhi Leonard, someone of that ilk, a max-level superstar. They ended up having to settle for Julius Randle. As you note, looking back, it doesn't look like that bad of a settling. Two-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA. Julius Randle won as many playoff series with the Knicks That's one. As Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, one with the Nets, one. The other interesting tidbit from that summer, at the end of the summer, they still had around $15 million in cap space. Marcus Morris finds out that he kind of breaks up his deal with the Spurs. Knicks signed him for a 1-year, $15 million contract. Then Perry flips him at the deadline for a first-round pick from the Clippers. That's the pick that Perry used to select Emmanuel Quickly.
Exactly.
So it was that kind of, again, it is a rather low bar, but Perry was in the room that decided not to make decisions, that decided not to compound mistakes. They needed someone to kind of get everybody on track and say, hey, we're going to do things differently now. We're not going to sign washed up, stars, hoping that we can, sell tickets and kind of generate interest. We're not going to trade future first round picks, and roll the dice that way. We're going to act as a rebuilding franchise, act smartly. We're still going to try to remain competitive. And as we sit here today, Knicks obviously traded the first round pick in the 2023 draft for Josh Hart, but control each of their following 6 picks after that, and 4 additional first round picks. Those are the kind of moves, those are the kind of things that smart GMs do, that forward thinking front offices make. And obviously Rose deserves plenty of credit, but Scott Perry was kind of the guy that broke with that was definitely, obviously we have the Phil Jackson debacle and Steve Mills and his short time running the Knicks made a couple colossal mistakes. Perry comes in, settles things down, takes a deep breath, makes a big move when he needs to in the Porzingis trade. That has certainly worked out well for New York. When everybody told you that it was the worst thing to ever happen to the franchise, the Knicks.
Yeah, they got rid of Hakeem Olajuwon.
Exactly, a young Hakeem / So all that said, was Perry perfect? Absolutely not. But he does deserve a lot of credit for ushering the Knicks into this new era, which is obviously on the upswing. And he was kind of the first person to kind of get everybody together and say, hey, let's do this. He kind of set the stage and deserves credit with Worldwide West and Rose and everybody that came in since then. But again, he deserves credit for where the team is now, especially when you look back at where it was 6 years ago.
Exactly. That's why I gave him a big salute to start the show. Shout out to Scott Perry. I only wish him the best of luck. And now the Knicks front office, where they go from here, who becomes the general manager? Gerson Rosas feels like the guy that's like right there. That I guess would make sense. I don't know how much I love him being the general manager. I don't think he necessarily did a great job in Minnesota. I really didn't love that they even brought him into this front office. So we'll see how that goes, I guess. But again, shout out to Scott Perry. Again, a really solid job for the Knicks. And hopefully he lands on his feet and gets an even better gig moving forward. But we now have, again, our NBA Finals matchup. It is one I would assume many folks had not predicted ahead of this playoffs. The Miami Heat are in Denver to take on the Nuggets for Game 1 of the Finals on Thursday. The Heat advanced to the Finals after staving off a Boston rally from being down 0-3 to win Game 7 in Boston. Meanwhile, the Nuggets have been essentially in chill mode for more than a week. They haven't played since May 22nd. That's when they beat the Lakers to complete a 4-game sweep in the Western Conference Finals. It has been 24 years since the Knicks have been in the NBA Finals, but in my opinion, watching these finals matchups has often served as an important indicator for me of what it will take for the Knicks to get to that level. So Tommy has some very important questions regarding this finals matchup before we get into predictions for this matchup, and they're Knicks related. So I'm asking you for each team. I'm going to start with the Nuggets. What is something about the Denver Nuggets? And let's take away they have Nikola Jokic, something like that, like something with like a guy on their team. But what is something about the Nuggets that you want the Knicks to implement to their team and how they run their squad and how they play from a night-to-night basis?
Yeah, exactly. Just draft one of the 15 greatest players of all time in the second round.
That'll certainly jumpstart the rebuild, right?
That'll help a franchise. No, seriously, I think. First of all, they drafted Jokic, and obviously it's parts luck, parts scouting, however you want to phrase it.
Yep.
But then they knew what they had, and they stuck with it. A lot of people said, "Don't trade Nurkic. Are you crazy? To create room for this Jokic guy." And 2 MVPs and another second place MVP and a finals trip later. That was obviously the right decision. But I think big picture, to directly answer your question, it's just to stay patient. there could have been some panic moves made, getting ousted in the first round last year with an MVP candidate. But the reality was, let's wait for Jamal Murray to come back. Let's not do anything crazy. Let's kind of work on the we have our cornerstones here with Murray. We trust he'll get healthy. He's going to do the right things, and Jokic, and let's build out around that. Smart trade for Aaron Gordon. I'd love the Bruce Brown signing this offseason.
Yeah.
Bringing in veteran presence like Jeff Green. It's this right mix of rolling the dice and taking chances when you feel it's necessary, by drafting Michael Porter Jr. Even though we slipped to 14, there was still obviously a great deal of rest coming off his back injury in college. So there's kind of all these things that work together, but a lot of those pieces have been together for a while now. And in other markets, and other if maybe Denver's a little bit more laid back, potentially lends itself to these not kind of rushed moves. But credit to the Nuggets, the front office, keeping Mike Malone, there for year after year after year. Some success, some ups and downs, but it's all paying off right now, and there's something to be said for that patience and continuity that that you could argue that the Knicks could benefit from this offseason.
I think that's a very good point regarding patience, because with the Knicks losing the second round, I think people, with every Miami Heat win, people feel better about perhaps the Knicks losing to that team, considering that this is a championship caliber team, apparently, because they made it to the NBA Finals. I think for me, and I think my sports man crush on Michael Malone is probably well documented from my Twitter account. He is probably my favorite coach in the NBA, and I'm a harp on him. Something that he does that I think I would really like Tibbs to incorporate into what he does and what he brings as a head coach, which is brutal honesty when talking about the level of play his team is playing at. I think that what I've loved about Michael Malone is not something a lot of people are getting very familiar with him in this playoff run. He has been like this since when he was in Sacramento.
Yeah.
He was probably the only coach ever to get DeMarcus Cousins to actually listen for a couple of weeks and actually play hard. And a lot of it was because of his approach to how he talks about his players. It is with a lot of love, but it is with a lot of brutal honesty. And to me, what I see from him is a guy that when they were struggling towards the end of the season, he wasn't sitting there saying, "Oh, we'll be fine and things will be okay." And he was saying this effort is not to the championship caliber that we are striving for. And if we continue to play this way, we will not advance to where we want to go. We will get bounced early. He will say how it is, and he's a Queens guy, and I'm a Queens guy, so maybe that's why I relate to him as much as I do. But to me, that's one of the things about Tom Thibodeau that has been the most frustrating. Has been when there are things that anybody who knows anything about basketball can see with their plain eyes, and then you go to the press conference, you have the coach not acknowledge that these things are issues. I think it creates a lackadaisical kind of mentality amongst the team, or at least among certain players, maybe not the whole team, that doesn't allow certain issues to get addressed. So I think for me, it comes with Michael Malone and how he approaches being an NBA head coach. I would hope that Tom Thibodeau could take a page from. I'm not saying you got to go out there and just blast your guys every single time things don't go well. But when you hit these little infliction moments in your season, which the Knicks had a couple of times, and you decide to kind of poo-poo it or kind of diminish what everybody sees as real problems, that I think is why you don't get to the mountaintop. Like Phil Jackson was not afraid to call out Shaq and Kobe when they weren't doing things correctly. Greg Popovich is not afraid to call out Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. In fact, a lot of those guys, especially with Pop, the whole thing with them was that he coached everybody the same, which is why those teams were so successful. I think I need Tom Thibodeau to bring that same energy to the Knicks next season if he wants to remain Knicks head coach, in my opinion.
It's a good point. I am the first to kind of diminish the impact that coaching has in games, and I'm more about its talent, and obviously coaching is a part of it. But I have to admit, if Mike Malone was coaching the Celtics this season, you'd have to think that they'd have a better chance at
Right.
they might be playing today. And a lot of folks were getting on Mazzulla for not calling out the players as much. And I was, one of the things I was thinking was pushing back. Listen, a first-year coach can't say it; he's just trying to curry favor. But You're right, Malone dating back to his days with the Kings when he didn't have job security and finals
Right.
trips and all this, resume. Like he was, straight up front right off the bat. So arguably I think most people would agree the two best coaches in the NBA are coaching against each other in the
Yes.
finals. So that lends credence to the belief that coaching is certainly of value. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and player roster composition, all that stuff is obviously important. But when you get to these, these hierarchy, game sevens and preparations in final series and Eastern Conference Finals, Western Conference Final Series, that's when coaching can have a greater impact than a stretch of games in January, February, etc.
And think about this as well. We talk about how blunt Michael Malone could be about his team in talking about whether they're playing great or they're playing terribly. You've never heard Michael Malone say, I gotta watch the film before I make any judgments about what's going on. Like, I don't know Tom Thibodeau. Michael Malone's a pretty damn good coach. He's pretty accomplished. He's pretty smart. He's been an assistant coach for a long time. He can give an assessment about how his team's playing, particularly about effort, that doesn't require him to watch the game 4 times. So when we talk about these nonsensical things Thibodeau talks about in terms of why he can't talk about why the team is struggling or things that they're not doing to a certain level, the whole I gotta watch the film is just not an excuse. This is a guy that took his team to the NBA Finals, and he don't seem to have to watch the film to know whether or not his team is giving maximum effort. So,
and also, if he watched the film and saw a guy not try, for possession after possession after possession, he wouldn't be afraid to call out that player publicly and answer the carpet. And maybe one season he'd try and let the player get away with it because he felt, based on a personal relationship, that might be beneficial, but not time and again, year after year after year.
Exactly. Now, speaking about the Miami Heat, and as much as it pains me to make this comment because I hate the Miami Heat as a Knicks fan growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, what is something about the Miami Heat that you would like to see the Knicks implement in terms of how they run their team?
Yeah, listen, I mean, it's obvious. The answer, I think, is pretty obvious, and it's a cliche at this point. It's a meme at this point, but Heat culture, you got to respect it, because the proof is in the pudding. The Heat are preparing for a Game 7, NBA Finals after beating the Celtics in Game 7, and should the Heat find a way to beat the Nuggets, this will go down as one of the most impressive postseason runs in NBA history. Knocked off the number 1 seed, the odds on by far championship favorite Bucks in the first round. Knocked off the Knicks in round 2. Team with the second best record, they play in the Eastern Conference Finals. Beat them in 7 games after losing games 4, 5, and 6 on the verge of an historic collapse. Come back, take a gut punch. Literal buzzer beater in Game 6, the first one in a playoff game of that magnitude since, I believe, a literal buzzer beater since Jordan shot over Craig Elo. It's fascinating. And should they go on to beat the number 1 seed in the West, that romped through the Western Conference playoffs, would really be an impressive run. And a lot of it has to do with accountability. We talked about it with Mike Malone, and that's the underpinnings of the. They demand effort. They demand hustle. They demand those other things that other teams hope for. You want to sign talented players and hope they play hard. They sign guys that work hard who also happen to be talented, and you see it. And another thing, obviously, is development of undrafted players and finding diamonds in the rough. So I think those are 2 things going forward that obviously every team in the NBA can learn from.
Yeah, you mentioned Heat culture, and I think on that same note, I think particularly how the Heat empower their role players to play like stars when needed. Because we saw it in the last series with Caleb Martin, where it wasn't a Heat team saying, hey, we're just going to run every single play through Jimmy Butler, and it's going to be Jimmy Butler or bust, whether we win or lose these games. Like, if they got a guy who's playing well, who has talent, they empower these guys to make plays. And Caleb Martin goes out there, plays with no fear, plays with no conscience, and undrafted, it doesn't matter once you're in the NBA. Once you're in the NBA, you're in the NBA. And you're in the NBA for a reason. All these guys have talent. And I think the way the Heat empower their role players, whether it's Martin, whether it's a Gabe Vincent, whether it's a Max Strus, whether it's a Duncan Robinson, and you hear the way Jimmy Butler talks about these guys, how much confidence he has in these guys. That gives these other guys confidence as well. And I think for the Knicks, how many times did we watch the Knicks this past season and said, why don't they get Quentin Grimes more involved? Why don't they run more plays for Obi Toppin? Why don't they play a man quickly more minutes before the Brunson injuries and he had to play more time? Like, sometimes the Knicks are kind of slow to say, hey, we don't have to just live or die with Brunson and Randall. Like, we can get these other guys involved and make these other guys part of the game, let these other guys make plays. I think the way the Heat develop their guys is a main reason why these guys are successful, of course, but also the way they empower these other players and get these guys shot attempts, get these guys involved in the offense. It allows these guys to stay ready so that when there is an injury to Tyler Hero or Jimmy Butler doesn't have it on a certain night, that these guys can step up and play great. I mean, the Knicks saw how effective Strus and Duncan Robinson and Martin and Vincent could be in that last series. There was a game where Jimmy Butler didn't play and they still almost won. So I think for me, how the Heat empower their role players is something I would love to see the Knicks do, because I think that's what, in the end, makes a great championship team.
And I think a lot of it starts from the top down. Obviously Riley to Spoelstra to Jimmy Butler, that kind of hierarchy are on the same page, and there's an understanding there, but there's also a humbleness there. And it sounds silly, but it's something we talked about during the regular season at times. Randall's insistence that he was going to shoot free throws on technical free throws, like that is something that, like that Spoelstra would have called out and said, listen, you're not the team's best free throw shooter. Who do you think you are, stepping the line like that? And guys on the Heat knowing that, Jimmy Butler in a game 7 and a game 1 in a must-win game 4 on the road is going to play both ends of the floor. When you have your hardest, your best player, Jokic, you can speak the same of. He's obviously not as skilled or athletic as Jimmy Butler, but in terms of intensity and effort, and unselfishness, those are traits that kind of seep down to the rest of the team. And when you have a player, your highest paid player, your leading scorer, who doesn't, let's put it kindly to Mr. Randall, doesn't embody those same characteristics, it can kind of have a trickle down effect, which is why, despite the regular season success, we'll be talking about the Knicks potentially trading Julius Randle, even though he's an All-NBA performer. So there's so much to weigh there. But, we talked about coaching. Chemistry is obviously another huge thing with both of these teams. Yeah. You can see it's impossible not to notice the closeouts on shooters. From the highest paid player to the Alonzo Highsmith, playing 5 minutes a game. Just
Hayward Highsmith.
Hayward Highsmith too.
I always want to call him Alonzo too because of the Miami connection, the U football player.
Right. It's just that, again, a lot of it has as I said, kind of trickle down effect from the top, front office, coaching staff, best player. That when you have an alignment there, that's good news.
And no one on the team has a sense of entitlement. Think about Duncan Robinson has that insane 2020 run in the playoffs where he established himself as maybe the best shooter in the NBA, and he gets this massive contract. And then next year, couple months in, they're like, this guy ain't cutting it. Have a seat. Have a seat, and we'll tell you when we're ready to put you back in. This guy, Max Strus, who's making basically peanuts, is bringing more on the defensive end. He's a more versatile player. He's going to go in. And the fact that they're able to do that to a guy like that, and that guy still be hungry and still be ready to produce when his number is called, like it is in this postseason when Tyler Hill breaks his hand, is just a testament to what they've built as, I hate to say it again, Heat culture. It just is what it is.
100%. And he could have complained. He could have demanded trade. All those another perfect example, Caleb Martin. They didn't make many signings after losing Game 7 in Boston the year before. They let PJ Tucker go. Financial restrictions. Caleb Martin doesn't play well essentially for the first half of the season. Decent but not great. Kevin Love gets waived by Cleveland. They sign him off the street, bump Caleb Martin to the bench, insert Kevin Love in the starting lineup. Caleb Martin doesn't bellyache. He makes the most of his opportunities. Eventually, as the playoffs were on, he outplays Kevin Love in a dramatic fashion. Kevin Love gets bumped back to the bench. Yep. You see Kevin Love cheering on the sideline and supporting his team. Caleb Martin back in the starting lineup and was a vote away from being most valuable player in the Eastern Conference Finals. So again, perfectly to illustration of your point, the Heat culture, the accountability, the unselfishness, all that type of stuff. Looking for players that don't necessarily bring just talent to the table, but also the other intangibles that the other teams are looking for.
You just get the impression that anybody who's on the Heat roster is willing to do whatever it takes to win, and that's all they care about. They don't care about anything else. And I'm not going to say like this is a Knick problem, because I think that like that's not natural for most NBA teams to have like 12 guys on the roster that's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Right. So that means Caleb Martin's got to score 25, then he's ready and willing to do that. That means Caleb Martin's got to play 10 minutes and play behind Kevin Love. That means he's willing and able to do that. If it means Jimmy Butler's got to score 50, he's willing to do that. If it means he's got to have 10 assists and score 12 points, he's willing to do that. Like, instilling that culture. And to Tom Thibodeau's credit, I feel like he talks about that a lot. He does try to talk about that and say that like winning is all that matters, and that you need to see what you're doing to contribute to winning. He's often made those kind of comments related to RJ Barrett, when Barrett has struggled with scoring. So I'm not going to act like Tom Thibodeau doesn't talk about this, but you got to be about it for all 12 guys on the roster. Like I said, it can't be excuses or exemptions for certain guys because they give you 20 and 10, or even Jalen Brunson. He's a guy that is a great offensive player, but is not giving you defense on some nights. You can't just say, well, he's a great point guard, so we're just okay with that. Like, and Jalen Brunson, he keeps himself accountable, so I'm not so worried about him. But that aspect, that idea that everybody, how many times we saw Mitchell Robinson belly aching because Knicks won a game by 20, but he had 2 shots. Like, that kind of thing just doesn't fly with the Miami Heat. Like, wasn't that guy Dedmon on the team, and like he was going crazy during one game this season? They got him out of there so fast. Like, you had to say his name, he was on another team. Like, that's just not going to be allowed or accepted in Miami. And it's all in or all out. That's it. Like, I have so many people talking the story about LeBron James going to Pat Riley's office and saying, yo, like, we're just not with this guy, Eric Spoelstra. And Pat Riley being like, who the hell are you to tell me how to run the team? He's saying that to LeBron James. I understand he's Pat Riley, but he's saying this is the best player in the world, one of the greatest players of all time. And he's saying, who the hell are you to tell me how to run an NBA team? You are part of a team. And if Pat Riley can do that to LeBron James, that's a message to everybody that ever comes to the Miami Heat about who's in charge, what the demand is, and the attitude of either you're in or you're out, and it's all about winning, and that's it. And I really hope that the Knicks find a way to recreate that aspect, because I think, to me, it embodies New York City. It's why Pat Riley and his teams in New York were beloved, because they kind of had that same mindset.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And also, as you noted, this is not something that's singular to the Knicks. Every team
exactly
is jealous of the way the Miami gets their guys to buy in.
Exactly. So, who you got in this series? Miami, Nuggets. Who wins how many games?
Yeah, and listen, we just waxed poetic and threw far too many flowers at the Heat. So, this comes from a place of respect for what Miami has done. Right. I picked them to beat the Celtics. That being said, I think the Nuggets are too good, too deep. They have no answer for Jokic. Bam is a good defensive player, but a bit undersized against, the big size, strength, IQ of Jokic. So I got the Nuggets in 5. I think they're going to make relatively short work of Miami. Again, would I be surprised if the Heat win? Nothing the Heat that has happened this postseason would shock me. So again, with giving all the ton of credit to Miami, we talked about all the reasons why they've been successful. There are a lot of reasons why the Nuggets were able to sweep the Lakers, a good Lakers team, why they've cruised basically, since January with the best record in the Western Conference. I think this is with as well as Jamal Murray's playing, with his, you bring Bruce Brown off the bench. I think Aaron Gordon's going to do a good job holding Jimmy Butler in check. Michael Porter Jr. is going to knock down some threes, and then Jokic. I think this is going to be a coronation of Jokic, the player that he's been the last 3 years, hasn't been respected properly. I think he's going to put the crown on over the next couple weeks and really let the world know I'm not just a good player. I'm not just a great player. I plan on going down as one of the greatest players of all time, and here's my kind of first entry into letting the world know that I'm here and I'm for real.
Yeah, I'm going with the Nuggets. I'm gonna say it's 6. I'm giving the Heat 2 games. I think that the Heat have just shown that against all odds, like, they're just not a team you could ever count out, and I think that anybody can make short work of them. And look, I doubted them every series they played in. I picked them literally to lose every series they played. So I mean, I guess I'm picking them to lose again, but I think this is probably the one I'm giving them the most respect and saying, hey, the team that's essentially dispatched the entire Western Conference and has been, probably the best overall team in the NBA for much of the season. I think you're going to win 2 games at least in this series. If they go 7, that wouldn't surprise me either. But I agree. I think the Nuggets just have too much firepower. I think Miami kind of hurt themselves going to 7 against Boston. They needed to dispatch them a lot quicker. They needed all the rest they could get, all the potential, planning and game planning and strategizing, trying different things in practice to kind of get themselves ready for this series. I think losing that time, I think, was costly. I think had that not happened, I think this maybe is a 7-game series and maybe it's more of a swing series in my opinion. I think going that far down the road against Boston, I think hurt them. So that's why I'm picking the Nuggets in 6, but it should be
plus
an entertaining series.
You give Mike Malone 12 days to prepare for an opponent. That's trouble.
Yeah, too. Exactly. So we'll see how the finals goes. We'll continue to update you guys on the latest involved with the NBA finals. But let's wrap up the show here talking about some of the other big moves happening in the Eastern Conference this postseason. Nick Nurse, he's hired by Philadelphia to be their head coach. He takes over for Doc Rivers, who was fired a few weeks ago. Nurse has reportedly already had a productive meeting with Joel Embiid ahead of being hired by Philadelphia. Then in Milwaukee, you got Nick Nurse's former assistant, Adrian Griffin, being hired to be their head coach. This is Griffin's first NBA head coaching job, but he's been a veteran on the sidelines. He's served under the likes of Nurse, Billy Donovan, Mike Krzyzewski, working with Team USA, and Tom Thibodeau, of all coaches. And then finally, with the elimination of the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, there could be changes coming in Boston as well. Now, head coach Joe Mazzulla may have done enough to keep his job by forcing a Game 7 in that series against Miami, but questions loom about what will happen with Jaylen Brown. He's a second-team All-NBA forward, which means he is eligible for a 5-year, $295 million supermax extension this offseason. His current contract expires in 2024. So staying with Brown real quick, do you think Brown stays in Boston? And if he doesn't, should the Knicks be interested?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back and forth, but I think that I think he probably stays. Here's the deal. He has the opportunity to become the highest paid player in the history of the sport. I know that'll only be for a short time until the next player signs the next max free agency, but a 5-year, $295 million contract is staggering, mind-boggling. If he demands that, listen, you have to sign me that, or I want out of here, then you don't respect me, yada yada yada. Then you have to reassess the situation and probably move on from him. If he's willing to accept a little less than that, or a lot less than that, 5 years, $225 million, something workable, still making him one of the highest paid players in the sport. But considering he's not even the best player on his own team, that's, that would seem like a wise compromise. Again, the Celtics have to sign Tatum to $350 million contract the summer after this. So
right.
there's only so much money to go around. I think if you want to, build a sustainable success and a roster that can survive, the ups and downs and have depth, etc. So for that reason, but the problem when you start looking at the alternatives, how do you trade Jaylen Brown and get better? I know he played poorly in Game 7, but he's also had some really good games. We saw him play, score 34 in the finals against the Warriors the prior season. So, and he was an All-NBA player. He plays both ends of the floor. Does he need to work on his handle? Yes. Does he need to cut down on the turnovers? Yes. Does he need to work on a shot selection? Yes. There are obviously, flaws there. But again, he's only 26 years old, has a ton of experience, has had a ton of success, has played more playoff games than anybody his age in NBA history. So, I go back and forth. I think ultimately, both sides will come to an agreement on a slightly reduced contract, income to that extension, and then going forward. If they ultimately decide that, a couple of years from now, that these two, Tatum and Brown, have to be broken up, at least at that point, they'll have them under contract. They won't, they'll have some leverage to deal him as opposed to him leaving via free agency. I just think it behooves both sides to make a short-term, to make a deal in the short term and then kind of reassess the future 1 or 2 or 3 years out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he should be back. If I was Boston, I would trade him. I think that You cannot sign him to that $295 million contract. That's insane. Could you get him for less? Maybe. And if he agreed to less, maybe I would consider it. But I do think that they need to shake things up with the whole Brown Tatum thing. Like, we've seen this story now for 4 or 5 years now. I just don't think that this is a championship combo. And it's not so much necessarily an indictment on either guy. But I think when you're allocating so much to those two players and then Marcus Smart is your starting point guard, I just don't think you can win. I think you need to upgrade the point guard position. And what Smart does with the intangibles, the defense, the clutch shot making, like, I understand all of that. I'm not necessarily saying he has to be off the team, but they just don't have a floor general or a guy that can get them into consistent, easy baskets. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they keep falling short. Because when you watch these games, they play this kind of random offense at the most crucial parts of games. And a lot of it is run through Tatum going ISO or Brown, who, as you mentioned, not the greatest ball handler, going ISO. And when you're playing against teams like the Miami Heat, teams like the Golden State Warriors, you're never going to win with those guys playing that way. So I would trade Brown to get in an all-star caliber point guard. I float out there Trae Young. I think that is something that could make sense. Brown is from Atlanta, so maybe he'd want to re-sign there. Maybe you consider a Dame Lillard swap. I don't know what it is, but I think something has to be changed in Boston.
It's a fair point. I mean, listen, can Tatum and Brown be the two best players on a championship team? The jury is certainly out.
I feel like, to me, I think Tatum could absolutely be the best player on the championship team, and I think Brown could be the second best player on the championship team. I just don't know if it's on the Celtics together. You know what I'm saying? Like, and there's evidence to suggest that that's the case.
But there's also evidence a year ago today where they up 2-1 or a year, they were that close, like a historic Steph Curry game 4 away from putting a chokehold on the finals. But this year they took a step back. If Ime Udoka stays around, and kind of keeps the Celtics in line all year, maybe does that make the difference? There's a lot there. I like what you're saying. If they can get an equivalent star back, then I think you definitely have to consider it. I just don't know. If you can, because you got to do it, you can't do it at the deadline because then you're trading a guy that's a rental, so that's why I said,
maybe off season. Yeah.
Right. So maybe it's an extend and trade, something along those lines, but it's fascinating to think about, where it can go.
And real quickly, because I know we got to get out of here, a Nurse in Philly, Griffin in Milwaukee, do you think that makes it more or less likely that Embiid and Giannis stay where they are?
We'll see. I think all the fan bases want to buy in. Embiid signed off on it. Let's wait to see how it plays out. I do think there's some smoke to the Embiid Philly fire, which is something Knicks fans will definitely keep an eye on and something we'll talk about over the next few weeks.
Totally agree on that front. So that's going to do it for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, and Audacy WFAN original, a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature to get these episodes every time we drop. We'll be back on Friday with another new episode. So make sure you guys, make sure you hit that auto download feature on your streaming service. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel. Tommy, let the people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you guys again for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.